Well, this poem is an uproarious parody. Before we read it, let me note a couple of things. First, the title is an allusion. Remember that an allusion is a reference to a literary work, a historical event or document, a location or person. The title here is a reference to a line in Shakespeare's Hamlet. The character of Hamlet is pretending to be crazy. He's talking to an old man, and they're looking at the clouds, and Hamlet is going on about all the things these clouds look like. And you know, we all do that some, especially as kids. We look at the clouds and try to see dragons and castles or whatever. Well, among other things, Hamlet says the clouds look like a whale. And the character he is talking to, not knowing what to make of this crazy guy, says, "Yes, very like a whale." And that's where the title comes from. It's kind of an incompetent title, just like this is a humorously incompetent poem. Second, like most parodies, there is a big difference between the author and the speaker. Ogden Nash is the author, and he's an excellent poet and humorist. Ogden Nash is capable of writing skillful poetic lines. The speaker in this poem, however, does not have a poetical bone in his body. Not only can he not write poetic lines, but he does not possess a poetic mind or spirit. He's a literalist. He sees nothing but what is on the surface. His mind isn't elastic at all. It can't make connections between and among diverse things. Now, having said all of that, he does have a point, however comically it's made. Let's read some lines. One thing that literature would be greatly the better for would be a more restricted employment by authors of simile and metaphor. Authors of all races, be they Greeks, Romans, Teutons, or Celts, can't seem just to say that anything is the thing it is, but have to go out of their way to say that it is like something else. What does it mean when we are told that the Assyrian came down like a wolf on the fold? In the first place, George Gordon Byron had had enough experience to know that it probably wasn't just one Assyrian. It was a lot of Assyrians. However, as too many arguments are apt to induce apoplexy and thus hinder longevity, we'll let it pass as one Assyrian for the sake of brevity. By the way, the word apoplexy means seizure or a spell of some kind. Okay, the speaker's point is clear. Poets use too much simile and metaphor. They ought to just call something by its name and forget the fancy stuff. Now, the particular poem that this speaker complains about is a poem by a 19th century English poet, Lord Byron, who was a poet of the Romantic school, like Wordsworth. And we're going to look at this Byron poem next. But before we do, let's see what this speaker has to say about it. First, in the lines we just read, he complains about the imprecise use of singular and plural. Let's see what else he has to say. Now then, this particular Assyrian, the one whose cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, a cohort, by the way, refers to a group. It was originally a military term, I think. Just what does the poet mean when he says he came down like a wolf on the fold? In heaven and earth, more than is dreamed of in our philosophy, there are a great many things, but I don't imagine that among them there is a wolf with purple and gold cohorts or purple and gold anythings. No, no, Lord Byron, before I'll believe that this Assyrian was actually like a wolf, I must have some kind of proof. Did he run on all fours, and did he have a hairy tail and a big red mouth and big white teeth, and did he say woof, woof, woof? Frankly, I think it very unlikely. And all you were entitled to say, at the very most, was that the Assyrian cohorts came down like a lot of Assyrian cohorts about to destroy the Hebrew host. But that wasn't fancy enough for Lord Byron. Oh dear me, no, he had to invent a lot of figures of speech and then interpolate them, with the result that whenever you mention Old Testament soldiers to people, they say, oh yes, they're the ones that a lot of wolves dressed up in gold and purple ate them. Well, that's pretty funny, and the speaker does have a point. Too much metaphor, an ill-used metaphor, can make something sound ridiculous. Sometimes a composition student will come up to me and ask if I'll look at some poetry that the student has written. Usually the weakest element of the poetry is unskillful use of metaphor, so it can be a problem. However, if anything is clear about this poem is that the speaker is no poet. He doesn't have any idea how to write a poetic line or use language in a skillful way. If we want to learn something about poetry, this is not the guy to go to. Let's look at the lines, "In heaven and earth more than is dreamed of in our philosophy, there are a great many things, but I don't imagine that among them there is a wolf with purple and gold cohorts or purple and gold anythings." That is another allusion. But like the title, it's an incompetent one. This is another allusion to Shakespeare's Hamlet. I used to teach Introduction to Shakespeare. That's how I know this stuff. Hamlet is speaking to his buddy Horatio, and they're talking about life. And Horatio is kind of a practical, down-to-earth fellow, and Hamlet is more of a free-thinking guy. And Hamlet says, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Okay, but it comes out a garbled mess when this speaker uses it. The joke is that he is complaining about poets misusing similes and metaphors, but he is misusing illusions. Well, let's see how the poem ends. That's the kind of thing that's being done all the time by poets from Homer to Tennyson. They're always comparing ladies to lilies and veal to venison. How about the man who wrote, "Her little feet stole in and out like mice beneath her petticoat"? Wouldn't anybody but a poet think twice before stating that his girl's feet were mice? Then they always say things like that after a winter storm the snow is a white blanket. Oh, it is it? All right then, you sleep under a 6-inch blanket of snow, and I'll sleep under a 1/2-inch blanket of unpoetical blanket material, and we'll see which one keeps warm. After that, maybe you'll begin to comprehend dimly what I mean by too much metaphor and simile. Well, the whole business about feet like mice does come from a real poem. It's an old English ballad by a guy named Sir John Suckling, 17th century. He was classified as a cavalier poet, which really meant that he was a wealthy guy who never worked a day in his life and wrote poetry on the side. He wasn't too good, but his one semi-famous poem is, I think, Ballad Upon a Wedding, and that comparison of feet to mice is in that poem. Obviously, this speaker doesn't like it. So his point is, just be literal. Now, the tricky thing about this poem is that even though it is legitimate criticism to a degree, the speaker's point is ultimately undercut by his own phrasing. As poetry, this is comically incompetent. The speaker is comically narrow-minded in his literalism. Because this is just a blundering poem, we realize that ultimately the speaker is wrong. If all poets were like this guy, no one would ever read a poem. And we'll see that more clearly when we look at the Byron poem this speaker is so upset about.